Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com, where I am your host. My name is Brent Skinner, and you've probably seen me at HR.com doing various things, and hopefully I've seen some of you at some point. But enough about me. Today is about my guest, Maher El-Abdallah, who is CEO of Align HCM. Hello, Maher.
Hey, Brent, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And thank you for agreeing to do this. We have a super duper interesting topic today. It's sort of my own sort of passion in the background when I'm talking about HCM, and I know it is yours too. We have a working title for this episode, which we might very well keep it as ROI doesn't just happen, why HCM value is earned, not installed. Um, and I can't wait to get into that with you.
Yes.
But as I ask all of my guests at the outset of these episodes, I'm going to ask you, there's a lot of passion in this space, the world of work. Everybody seems to be a lot of people seem to be on a mission, especially in leadership. What makes you tick? What galvanizes you every day, Maher?
That's a great question. I think for me, um, it's all unlocking personal ROI. So I've been in this industry my entire career. I've never worked outside of HCM. It's all I do and it's all I've ever done. And early on, I was part of a startup where, as a kid right out of college, I was really entrusted in being part of a fast growing team and entrusting in accomplishing things that are greater than my abilities and what I thought my limits were. And so for me, what makes me tick now as a business owner and as a leader is seeing our people unlock their own personal abilities and do more than they thought that they could do and deliver and really grow in themselves. And that's what I'm extremely passionate about. And I think that's what makes us successful.
Yeah, yeah. I love that, opening up personal ROI. I mean, that's really cool, and it kind of cuts through all the noise of, operational efficiency and all this kind of stuff, which matters, right? But it gets into like the larger picture, and that's actually a great segue to our topic today. Um, Here's sort of the tagline we have for this,
Uh-huh.
organizations invest heavily in HCM platforms, expecting ROI to follow. But the total potential value doesn't materialize automatically. Now you've kind of, we were in the green room the other day. This is not a late night talk show, but we do have a green room on this podcast. And we were talking about this. We had actually a couple of great conversations around this topic. That's what kind of led us to do this episode. But you were saying that, there's basically three layers to the ROI journey: operational efficiency, workforce effectiveness, and ultimately strategic capability. Do you want to just speak to that for a little bit? And then I have a couple questions to ask you as follow-up.
Yeah. I think if you think about it, like layer one, like you mentioned, operational efficiency. What is that? And it's basically, the cost reductions that come with implementing an HCM solution, the time savings, the error elimination. It's the classic, when I first started in my career, it was the classic, you're going to save 1 to 4% of your overall payroll costs from having really good time and scheduling. And so, that operational efficiency, or what we'll call layer one, that's auto visible as far as I'm concerned. The system
Mm,
processes the payroll, the hours are saved, finance sees it, nobody has to do any extra work to capture it. And I think that's where most organizations stop. Having
yeah.
said that, if you move on to layer two and layer three, we start talking about workforce effectiveness. We start talking about strategic capability. So what does that mean? Faster time to productivity. You're going to start reducing regrettable turnover. You're going to have better manager performance. You're going to smarter scheduling and coverage for your people. You start going into the strategic world where you start doing some real planning and modeling, predictive attrition, competitive intelligence, and developing an internal talent marketplace. And those require intentionality. You really have to decide that you want to use the data, you want to have ask the question, and you want to act on the answer. And I think the biggest issue why people are really stuck on layer one and don't really move into the more strategic layer two of effectiveness and strategic capability is because it's the HCM system is often owned by administrators internally. They're not strategists. The system is getting managed and it's not getting leveraged. So I think leadership has to ask different questions. It's no longer like, is payroll running and is payroll okay? It's what is our workforce data telling us about where we're headed? You know, and can we shift the HCM from being a system of record and treating it as a system of intelligence? And I think that's where we start unlocking real ROI beyond, what's auto visible today.
So this kind of cuts right to the heart of what we were talking about the other day, and that is, how because the first layer, efficiency, right? That's what everyone's kind of fixated on and focused on. Not wrongly, right? Because it's very important, but that's what everyone's kind of fixated on when we make sort of the decision to maybe upgrade or do a switch or a lift and shift or a rip and replace or whatever of an
Right.
HCM system, right? But and sometimes those numbers don't support the rationale. Like the rationale from that perspective doesn't support a change, right? But maybe some of the other two layers, like the second and third layer, if if we were able to somehow articulate those better to all of organizational leadership, then a decision to make the change might actually be made.
And it's going to bring HR and payroll a seat at the table. So I think
Yeah.
today, largely HR payroll, you stick with the operational efficiency that you just mentioned, and those, what you see as ROI savings, that's just seen as like you said, you implement it and you install it, and it's there. Uh, but strategically, HR and payroll are not being invited to have a seat at the table because they're not leveraging the intelligence of the system. They're just simply using it as a system of record.
Yeah. Do you think it's maybe a two-step sort of process where let me see if I can sort of set this forth. So there, do you think we really are at a place where we really need to make it needs to be a solid story, rationale around the first layer in order to make a change, but at the same time, sort of concurrently in parallel, HR needs to be, and maybe organizational leadership needs to be just sort of aware of, and HR leadership needs to be intentional about leveraging that system later. Is there anything about the other two layers though that can be brought into the initial decision making to make a change?
Is there anything about the two layers that can be brought into the initial decision making? I think of it as this. Your initial layer, you're building a foundation. You're building a really solid foundation of your organization. But the other layers are the ability to grow that foundation from a single story house into a skyscraper. And so, yeah, you do have to have a very solid foundation. You really have good operational efficiency. But I think for the most part, most of the vendors on the marketplace today, from a software perspective, are building really strong platforms. And they give you that foundation that you need to build on. And that's why I say to unlock layers two and three, it does require intentionality and it does require the ability to leverage the system, not simply manage the system.
What does that so what does that intentionality look like? What does discipline and administration look like in practice? Like, as we hear about this all the time, and we say everybody nods their head because it makes sense, and we all agree,
Right.
right? But how do you actually do that in the day to day? I think that's where a lot of people. It's just the same thing with just to go off the beaten path for a second here. A lot of people hear the term strategic payroll or strategic HR, right? And and a lot, especially in the payroll space, it sounds good. Yes, I want to be strategic payroll, right? but what does it actually mean? We actually did an episode about that over a year ago around what does it actually mean to be for payroll to be strategic. But and so taking it out of just payroll, but how like in the same vein, like what does it look like in practice to actually be disciplined in administration and to get to that intentionality?
Yeah, I think you got to start with data governance. That's job number one. You got to have clean org structures. You got to have consistent job codes. You got to have current position management. It all sounds boring, but it really is the foundation that everything else is built on. So, data governance, job number one. And then I think it really moves into implementing a culture of completion within the organization. So, what is a completion culture? That means like performance reviews are getting done on time. They're not an afterthought that everybody's scrambling on and they're missing the timelines on. Learning is completed and recorded on time and regularly. Compensation is updated after merit cycles. Manager hierarchies are corrected after org changes. Like each one of these seems minor, but collectively they determine what your data can tell you. So implementing a completion culture in your organization is the next step after ensuring that you have data governance done. I
What does implementing a completion culture look like? Like, how do you go about because that makes sense. I like that because often we go into meetings, there's a lot of planning, we talk about implementation, there's a lot of, careful thinking around that, but then everybody, then there's kind of, like a question mark and stuff doesn't get done and right? So, what is the how does that work?
I think and it brings me to my next point, Brent. I think
Yeah.
the reason why people struggle with having a culture of completion, especially around HCM, is most likely they don't really have anyone who owns HCM. It's not really administered in-house. And I think the best administered HCM solutions and systems out there today are organizations where they have a person who or a team of people who treat the platform like a product, not a utility. So they're governing it, they're auditing it, they're continuously improving it. These systems need to be continuously improved to meet the people's needs and demands. And so if your employees see that the system is being continuously improved upon and you're treating it like a product, not a utility, naturally that's going to lend itself to implementing a culture of completion. They're going to more likely use it. And I think, we talk a lot about user adoption. I think that's extremely important. And so I think a completion culture tied with a well administered HCM solution is what drives user adoption. And then it starts feeding the cycle. And now you start looking at, hey, we have discipline and administration and we're building something that's more strategic. On the other side of this, there's a cost to not doing it. So if you're not doing that, you're not administering the system, you're not treating it like a product, it's a utility, you're not consistently improving it, you're not auditing it. Attrition prediction is going to break. You don't have pay equity analysis. It's impossible to do. You can't do workforce planning models or whatever you can produce is bad data and it's unusable. So you're really not taking advantage of the system. And so I call it the digital filing cabinet. So your HCM solution becomes a digital filing cabinet because it's just storing documents and processing transactions for you. And you really haven't crossed over into the strategic territory yet. And that's where you really need to go.
Yeah. So it's really about um paying attention to it every day and engaging with the system and to extract that value. The last thing you want to do is sort of set it, is implement it and forget it, or deploy and forget, or go
Right.
into cruise control mode or self-driving mode if it's a Tesla or whatever, right? So, um,
And
how can
Brent, what I've
go ahead.
seen, yeah, what I've seen in this space, and you've been in this space just as long as I have. I think when we first started out, you were buying learning from a different vendor and it was its own piece of software. You were buying compensation from a different vendor, recruiting, benefits administration, payroll, HRMSs were their own databases. And you had system expertise and subject matter expertise for each area, and now, large in part, they're all on one platform. And it's really hard to administer that platform because, you may know a lot about talent management and performance management and compensation, but maybe you're not a payroll expert. Maybe you don't know the intricacies of benefits. And how do you administer that as an organization to really take advantage of the product? It's difficult task to do. These systems are quite wide. They have a lot of breadth to them, and so I don't think it's an easy task. And I do believe, there's a lot of organizations that have figured it out and they do it internally with a team of people. A lot of them outsource the administration, and that makes them a better organization. But it is hard to not keep it as a digital filing cabinet and be strategic, because it's such a wide and it touches every part of your organization. So uh, again, we're going back to being intentional. You have to be intentional. You have to give this the due that it deserves, because it's a lot of work, but that work pays off.
Yeah. And also engaging line managers or leaders across the organization, because HCM, or whatever you want to call it, happens wherever there is an interaction between a manager and an employee, or wherever work is getting done across the organization. So it's really sort of a holistic company. Just like these systems are wide, this is also a company-wide effort.
Agreed. And that's a great point. Line managers, they could be a prerequisite for a lot of this administration. And you know what? Line managers want to be heard. They want to be listened to, and they have all the best feedback that you can take and incorporate and continuously improve the system.
Yeah, yeah, and what a great way to get them more involved in these HCM tools that are otherwise seen as sort of a perfunctory sort of background thing over the course of somebody's employment, right?
Exactly. You're giving them ownership over the system, and you're now implementing this completion culture that we talked about by getting them involved. They're going to be more likely to input and invest into the system and making it better, because they see that you're listening to them.
Crowdsourcing a completion culture.
I
I
like
love
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's write an article about that. Um, if in the time that we have left, to the extent that we haven't answered this yet, because I think there's a little bit more to talk about here. Um, you were talking about, like 10, 15 years ago, you would buy like the solutions were very siloed, right?
Right.
And you see it today. I mean, we finally, thank goodness, we no longer have this term talent management, really. People still use it sometimes, but we're not talking about it. We're not, we're not referring to it as talent management. We're not talking about simply a succession planning, succession planning solution, just a compensation management solution, or just a learning solution, or whatever. You see a lot of blending. I did a podcast, an old podcast I used to be on many years ago now, well, about 4 or 5 years ago. We said talent management, will it blend? Well, I think we've reached the conclusion that it will. A lot of you look at companies, some of the mainstays in the space, in the learning space, they've kind of pivoted. Now they're AI solutions, but in the interim, they kind of blended all that stuff. Everything was kind of mixed together, because learning, performance management, compensation management, succession planning, it all happens together,
Right.
right? So how do we connect the dots or data across the full employee life cycle to be more strategic and to yield more decision-ready insights? Like, how can we kind of make this work for ourselves, for
And
us?
not manage it in silos, because I think that's where
Y-
most organizations are today. Manage
Yeah.
it in silos. Um, I think what you're talking about, Brent, is actually where the intelligence lives. It's in the connections together. So, um, let's think about the recruiting process, for example. You got a recruiting source, you got performance ratings of your people, and you understand what your retention is. And those are all three separate areas or data points that are available in your HCM solution today. So now when you start looking at not individually or in silos, but at a connected process from recruiting to performance ratings to retention, you start to understanding what are the recruiting channels that are producing the best long-term employees for us? That's now strategic insight. And now you're going to be able to change where you spend your recruiting dollars on, for example. If you start looking at as onboarding and layer on top of that your 90-day performance reviews, that you have a completion culture right now, so people are actually doing that, and you start looking at what manager is attached with those employees, and you can start seeing like what managers are losing employees early. You start being able to intervene before it becomes a pattern. You start connecting compensation positioning with performance reviews, with tenures. You start understanding flight risks, and you start saying, okay, well, we're paying people this much. Here's what the performance rating, here's how long they're staying with us. And now you can have start targeted retention conversations, not general ones. And so I think HR managers and HCM leaders today, they have a lot of HR metrics and they're able to report on a lot of HR metrics, but I think that's not what they need to be focused on. They need to be successful, you need to start translating those HR metrics into business outcomes. So,
Yeah.
you know, you know what the time to fill is, and that's your HR metric, but CEO, CFO, they don't care about time to fill. They care about revenue protection. So time to
Yeah.
fill needs to be looked at as revenue protection. Attrition rates, as a CEO, what's that telling me? I just want to know about the cost of capital. So attrition rates should be cost of capital. You need to be understanding business outcomes and talking this way. Learning completion should be liability exposure. And that's when you're going to start seeing these HR metrics and datas move into the strategic realm. You start being invited and having a seat on the table. Okay, we're thinking of doing an acquisition. We're thinking of merging with another business unit from another company. We're thinking of going into a new um, market. And now HR and payroll all of a sudden are going to have a seat at the table because they're thinking strategically. They're using the data and the HR metrics that are in the system, but they're tying it to the business outcomes. So they're now speaking the same language as CEOs and CFOs.
Yeah.
And they now start telling a broader workforce story. And I think that's very important.
Oh, it is very much. And that the translation of sort of the conventional or the tried and true KPIs on the HR side to something to its analog or to its counterpart on the CFO side. That's such an important skill. And call me a dreamer, but it would be great to kind of get the CFO to speak the language of the CHRO as well. Maybe we could go in both directions here.
Maybe, maybe. I agree with you. Listen, the HR metrics are there. They're there within the system. I think from our perspective as CHROs and payroll and HCM professionals is let's connect that. So we connect it through the all what's individually siloed today, and and let's kind of start speaking the business outcome language. But like you said, Brent, there's no reason why a CFO can't take that connected data and start speaking our language. But I think the key is it can't be the siloed HR metrics. It has to be the connected data. And that's where you're going to find common grounds with the CFO.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great place to conclude this episode. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast. This is a really, really important conversation, and it's always super interesting for me. Thank you so much, Mahar, for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Brent.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.